You're listening to Parasearch Radio, news, views and reviews from the world of the paranormal from across the UK and beyond. Find us on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web. Parasearch UK Radio. Parasearch Radio, broadcasting to the UK and beyond.
The views and opinions expressed by presenters and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Parasearch Radio or its affiliates and sponsors. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to Haunted Histories with your host Penny G. Morgan, right here on Parasearch Radio.
Well, hello and a very warm welcome to everyone on this Wednesday evening. Hi, Jem. You made it home from the gym then? Or did you not go? Or are you going later? Let me know. Let me know, because I'm still live and loud at this precise moment in time. So, yes, feel free to have a chat if you've got nothing else to do on this Wednesday evening. Who's happy it's a bit warmer than it's been, eh? No more snow. I know I am. I'm not a snow person. Really not. Much to my children's disappointment, shall we say. I think they'd be quite happy if I was into the snow. Hi, Kerry. So, what have I got to say before we start tonight's show on Chatham Dockyards? Well, there's still a competition. Hi, Ash. There's still a competition running on the Parasearch page to win a tarot reading with our gorgeous evil queen of Parasearch Radio, the wonderful Kerry Greenaway. So go ahead and give that post a like and make a little comment and tell us how much you want to win. Hi, Rich. Wow, everyone's in tonight. The other thing as well that I want to mention is that I'm going to be doing a Facebook Live Q&A on Saturday at 6 p.m. on the Parasearch group page. Come and talk to me. Don't leave me hanging. I'm going to do my makeup and everything. You know, I'm going to make an effort, people. I need to see you there. Need to see you there chatting to me. So any questions that you've got, if you're not going to be able to make it for the actual live, please feel free to message them to me on the Parasearch page, or just come along and have a chat. We'll have a party. We'll have a party on the Saturday evening, 6 o'clock, shall we? And see if I can keep the kids quiet enough so they don't show their faces on camera as well. But enough of that malarkey and frivolity. Tonight's show is on a place that never gets investigated, and that's always something that's going to interest me. It's also a place that's got hundreds, and I mean hundreds, of years of history. Do you want to hear about it? And on my show tonight, you know that I go all over the world talking to people. I talk to people actually thousands of miles away. Australia, America. And my guest tonight was introduced to me by, again, one of my foreign guests, the lovely Charlo from Malta, when we talked about the tunnels of Valletta. But my guest tonight, actually, I probably could have just shouted over the sort of rooftops to do this interview, because he's only about 10-15 miles up the road from me. It's Darren Jensen. Hi, Darren. How are you?
Hi, I'm very well, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's nice. It's nice to have a fellow Essex bod on for once.
Yeah.
Yes, things like I talk to people all over the world, so it's nice to have someone from my neck of the woods. So I was saying you've got a link with the lovely Charlo from Malta.
Yep.
What exactly is that link?
So it's through a international organisation called EPAS. Which stands for European Paranormal Activity Society, which is an organisation that was originally set up in Italy by the founder Max Maresca. And what they basically tried to do was formulate an organisation with well-experienced paranormal investigators but trying to formulate it across Europe, hence the European name.
Yeah.
Since then, it's expanded and it's actually gone global now. We're in Australia, America, and various other parts of the world. And the idea is that we can sort of reflect different foreign history and also the scientifics behind it, but also the opportunity to fly over to these other countries and see how they do it and get involved with them.
Because I know every year you fly to one of the member countries, don't you, and all do an investigation.
Yeah, this year we had Ireland come over. It was only one section of the organisation, and we went to Beacon Fort in Harwich. The year before, I held the first ever international event in the UK, where I actually had 5 countries fly into the UK and a hotel locally. And we actually went to Coalhouse Fort. We got to go and investigate down there. So it was nice to actually have different countries all fly into the UK.
Yeah. And I mean, with some countries, I mean, places like Malta and everything, they have got a long history. They've got buildings as old as ours, but some of the other countries like the Americans and all of that, having buildings that are I mean, I don't know about Coalhouse, but I know if you went slightly further up to Landguard Fort, for example, that's had something there for nearly 500 years. So to have that kind of history and breadth of time that they can investigate is something a bit different.
I don't think we actually appreciate how much history we do have, to be fair. And a lot of us all go abroad and we look at the foreign stuff and this, that and the other. And I was quite taken back as just how much history we do actually have here. So since being involved in the paranormal side of it and looking into things after we've investigated, it's actually quite shocking how far things do actually go back.
Well, you are talking to a historian here, Darren, so...
Yeah, but...
That's one of the reasons I do this show, because it gives me an excuse to look up things without sort of feel like I'm wasting my time. So you did Beacon Fort, did you say, recently?
Yeah, it's now been taken over. It's been bought now, but it was derelict when we went there, Right,
yeah. I had read that two guys have bought it out and they're hoping to turn it into an attraction and renovate it and sort of get people to realise what it actually was. I'm doing a lot of research at the moment on Harwich Redoubt for my new book, and obviously Beacon Fort comes into that, but because before it became a fort, it was one of the batteries that was built to sort of accompany the Martello Towers and Harwich Redoubt, which is in effect a giant Martello Tower. So it's one of the ones that's come up on my radar, so to speak.
It's very amazing to see. I mean, when we went there originally, it was all very overgrown. And we didn't really get to appreciate the vast size of the site. But since going back, we went back recently, and since it's been taken over, and you actually completely get all the way around there now, and the place is so vast and huge, it's unbelievable.
Oh, it is accessible, is it? Even though they've taken...
It's open to the public now. You pay a contribution to go in. It's not open for investigations immediately, but we went in there in the day when we went back, and you can actually get in and around there now,
Thing is, though, is one of the conversations I have with lots of people is you don't actually have to go at sort of 11 o'clock at night on your own to do an investigation, because you can have experiences at any time of the day.
Yeah, definitely, especially in the tunnels and stuff like that, because obviously there's no natural light down there as well. Obviously, all you've got is just your sense and feeling when you're inside these enclosed areas. And we had a few sort of experiences as such in some of those tunnels, and it was quite eerie to say the least.
So why did you set up you've got your own group? Remind me what they're called again.
New World Paranormal.
New World Paranormal.
Yeah, New World Paranormal itself's been going 15 years now, to which we do investigations, but not on the same scale as some people that have formulated them as a business. We got every couple of months we're going looking somewhere else. Sometimes just a couple of us, but sometimes all 8 of us will go. And it was set up after I originally was part of another group. I originally went along as a guest, and the practices that I saw I didn't sort of agree with, but again, that's just personal opinion. And then being local, I started researching local venues and started buying bits of equipment and went off to do some investigations. And since then, the group's got wider and bigger. Some people have left, more people have joined. And we're a close-knit group, and we enjoy what we do.
So what's been your favourite investigation to do with the group?
My favourite investigation that we went to was actually the Punch Bowl in Paglesham. It's a pagan village
Right.
on the back end of Rochford. I believe it's closed down now, but a friend of mine, her mum and dad owned it for many years, and we got some really nice experiences in there, some nice video evidence of unexplained things, like, and when I say unexplained things, like ruling out the scientifics.
Yeah.
We had some quite good stuff there, but because I think it's a place that's never been touched as well, it was quite compelling to go in there and do things that have never been done before.
Yeah, definitely, I understand that. Now, when we started chatting and we sort of said about you being a guest on the show, I asked you what sort of places you wanted to talk about, and you gave me a massive long list of places that you'd be happy to talk about, but one of them really stuck out for me because not only is it quite close to us, most people have probably driven past the signs to it who live in the UK, especially in the south of the UK. Yeah. And as a historian, even though naval history isn't really my speciality, I knew it had a bucket load of things I could talk about, and that's Chatham Dockyards. Now,
Yes.
What made you pick Chatham Dockyards? Because it's huge.
The site itself is very, very vast. The buildings we investigated are actually a mile long. And I, with my day job in the ambulance service,
which is ironic, seeing as we just heard a siren going past. I was chuckling just then. They were coming to get you. You're late for work.
Straight past my house. I used to work for the ambulance service in Kent, and we got a call to Chatham Dockyard, and I went in there. I'd never been in there before, and I got to saw some of the historical features and the buildings, and I started looking into sort of how old the place was. The manager came out and, because of health and safety, was discussing what had happened and filling the relevant paperwork out. And I managed to obtain some contact information, and outside of work I contacted them and just explained a bit about myself and what I do outside of work, and asked if I could come down, and I was quite shocked at being asked to come down for a meeting, and we had a meeting, and it transpires we're one of the only teams that was fortunate enough to go in and investigate. Admittedly, we was sort of cordoned to one end of the building because obviously the water and stuff like that. But yeah, no, it was very interesting to say the least.
Well, the thing is, I'll do my little wee history lesson now for those people listening who want it. Chatham Dockyards, it shut in the mid-80s as a docks, and an awful lot of people were put out of work because it was a massive, massive employer for the whole of Kent, really. But it can date itself back to the reign of Elizabeth I in the mid 16th century, which is massive. And at the moment, it's about an 80 to 90 acre site, which is big enough as it is. In its heyday, it was something in the region of 400 acres, and to get from one side of it to another, there was a bus that ran for people. In the 19th and the 20th century when it was operating, it was that big. So when you look at that pure size of it, the events that must have gone on there, even if we don't look at some of the famous historical events, which I'm actually going to touch on because a couple of them are quite fascinating. I think at its peak it had over 10,000 people working there, something astonishing in that sort of, when you think about it, that number of people, and it was just huge. It was absolutely huge. I think I read there was over 26 different trades there, and like I say, there was a bus sort of towards the end of its life to get you from one side to the other. It was so long. But there's a few sort of ships that we can mention that people have probably heard of. The last Royal Navy warship that was ever built there was a submarine called the HMS Ocelot, and I think that's one of the ones that's still there, isn't it? It's one of the ones that people can go and have a look at. Yeah, and that was in 1962. You've got Lord Nelson's HMS Victory was built there. Victory, that was the ship that he died on in the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805, more of which more of which later. You've also got, and this one makes me laugh, it's called the HMS Gannet. That's it was built in 1878 and was actually in service for 90 years. 90 years that was in service for. But there's also some other sort of well-known ships. You've got HMS Valiant. You've got HMS Vindictive, which was built in 1897, which actually was quite fundamental in World War One. It was used as something called a block ship in 1918 in Ostend. In other words, they deliberately sunk it and set fire to it so that the sort of estuary there was blocked at the time. It's just an amazing sort of stories when you start to read up on exactly what was done at Chatham and how fundamental this place was. And I'm going to talk about the Battle of the River Medway at some point, because I find that's quite an interesting story. But which part of it? You say you got to investigate one bit of it that was nearly a mile long. I'm presuming this is one of the slip buildings we're talking about.
It's actually the building. I don't know if anyone watches television. The opening credits to the TV show Call the Midwife.
You just stole my thunder there, Darren. I was going to mention Call the Midwife. God.
The buildings, like the enclosed sort of, it looks like a long road. That's actually the shot between the two buildings. Well, there's actually three buildings down one end. We got to investigate the original ropery building.
Right.
Now, when I read back on the history afterwards, Chatham Dockyard was one of the original roperies, and
yes.
actually is still a functional ropery to date.
Yeah.
It's a 3-floor building. It's actually a mile long. We were sort of confined down one end, obviously because of health and safety, and the exit was right next to the building. But yeah, we was quite fortunate enough to investigate that building.
Yeah. But were you able to walk around the dockyard at all?
Yeah, so we got there early, and we got to walk around the dockyard and see it in its glory during the day. For the likes of me, I got to see it when I went before, like I was with work. But the rest of the crew actually got to see the vast size of it. I mean, you got to see the Ocelot submarine and the various other ships that are docked there. But as well as obviously like the naval quarters and that, which we've got buildings adjacent to the ropery, which was the original naval quarters.
Yeah. So what was your initial impression of it, walking round? Bear in mind, this is only a third of what it would have been in its heyday.
During the day, when it was, it's quite compelling to look at a building or a site and try and imagine what it would actually have been like in that time, and the different sort of layers of history that the place had. You get quite an emotional feeling when you walk around it, especially when you sort of see some of the really old buildings and sort of how they used to have to live in comparison to our life of luxury we have now with all the modern technology we have.
Yeah.
So to see things for how they were, it's quite an eerie feeling, especially when you go into the dark sides of the building, like inside the ropery, and because some of the areas haven't only got a natural light in there. And when you walk around seeing that's how they used to have to live and work, it's quite interesting to say the least.
So you weren't there in July 2018, were you?
No.
Ah, because there was a body discovered there, a young man in July 2018. He was discovered by one of the ships. He'd fallen in the water. No,
I wasn't there then. I've been over in working in the ambulance service in Essex since sort of 2017. So
right, probably one of your colleagues then, based in Kent, would have had to go to that one.
More than likely, yeah.
Yeah. So when you were there and you were investigating the rope house, can you give me sort of an idea of some of the experiences that you guys had?
Yeah, so we originally was sort of ushered around the building by the management team, because obviously they know the layout of the building. Even though we had a bit of a brief walkthrough, there's a lot of hazards in there, and the building is basically in the exact same state as it's always been as a functional ropery. So the first thing we saw was just bikes everywhere, which, believe it or not, that's how they get around the building, because it's so big. And as we was walking through different sections of the building, you just get an overwhelming feeling of it's really hard to explain, sort of like different time spans, if that makes sense.
Right.
That's the impression that sort of some of the team were getting. And sort of we looked into this a little bit later, and one part of the building, which we was actually on, one floor, we could actually hear running. And the first we was checking, there was that we was the only ones in the building, which after sort of the security and the staff there that walked through were verified we was the only ones in the building. So we started running, and it was only in one section of the building. And then we started looking back through sort of some of the history later on to actually find out that we was told that one of the ships there was actually used, I don't know if you want to call it like an orphanage, so basically where it was housed children. Which were used as like a workhouse on these ships. And at one point it came into dock and it stayed into dock. The actual long length of history, you would know far better than I would on that. But it sounded like little feet running. It wasn't like heavy. It was very, very light. It was just running. We moved forward into other sections of the building. As I say, we was picking up strong links to the Spanish. Which
that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah. So we were picking up strong links to Spanish, and this was in certain sections of the ropery, which is actually where the ropes were actually made. There was another thing that was picked up by one of the team. It was actually in sort of some of the office quarters, and that was the feeling of someone actually being strangled and thrown out of a window. To which, when we looked back later, we actually confirmed that there actually was a murder that took place actually in the dockyard. So various bits and pieces was picking up, but it was the biggest thing for me was the feeling the different sort of time spans as we was going through. Whether that's part and parcel of the psychological side of the way your brain works, and you're actually thinking, because you know there was different layers of history there, that you're actually thinking and feeling that way, but it just felt sort of too overwhelming to actually dismiss it.
Yeah, that's strange. I mean, I've investigated quite a few places that have got hundreds of layers of history to them, but I always tend to find it's only one or two eras that I lock into. I don't get that. I sort of know that there's lots there because one of the conversations I have, this seems to be it's like Marmite. I mean, being British should understand what I mean. It's like Marmite, this thing. Some people want to know the history of a place before they go there. Some people are adamant not to know anything, and they want to go in totally blind. With someone like myself, because of doing this as a hobby, the podcast, and being a historian as a hobby as well, it's almost impossible for me to go in somewhere and not have a bit of an idea as to what its history was. The one thing I don't look up is any reported hauntings. I never look those up. I always go in blind in that respect. But I can't say I've ever been in somewhere and felt the layers of history. I've known them, but not felt them. So it's interesting. I find it interesting that you say that. Somewhere like Landguard Fort, which is one of my favourite places, 500 odd years of history there. I think it was a blockhouse in Henry VIII's time. I've only ever picked up on 2 or 3 different eras when I've been in there. It's not been like everything rushing in. It's only 2 or 3. So it's interesting you say that about the rope house, because rope has been pivotal to the nautical industry since, well, the year dot, really, isn't it?
Yeah, well, for myself, it was most certainly the children, as well as obviously the other bits which I've discussed. The rest of the team, obviously, there's 3 psychics on the team. And I know everyone has their view and opinion on psychics and the way they work, and whether they actually think they're real in obviously what they're doing. The people on our team I know very well. I've known for many years, and I can sort of vouch for sort of the ability of the team. The things that they were picking up on and being split into different sections of the building, say it's 3 floors, so we stayed away from the top floor, obviously, because we didn't actually want to be right above everyone else. And it was as we was going through, obviously one member of the team was noting each group's what they're saying and bits and pieces, and it was when we actually compared the notes that we'd actually realised that people were picking up on different things. To say the main thing that it was definitely Spanish, and a strong links to children. Again, the one thing that we wanted to initially dismiss was obviously the World War side of it. However, that said, when we looked into the World War side of it, we was actually quite shocked that sort of left alone it was. The dockyard itself, considering it was a major piece of history, and where it stands, was actually quite shocked at sort of how it was left, and it appeared it took a little bit of shelling, but
that was about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, its main involvement in the wars was the ship repair and construction. That was its main sort of claim to fame.
Yeah, absolutely.
I suppose
I'd go with that. Yeah, definitely.
And when you think about how heavily bombarded Kent and Essex was, where you think about all the different fighter RAF fighter bases that were in Kent to stop the bombers and the fighters and the V1s and the V2s and all of that kind of thing. It's quite amazing that Chatham wasn't blown to smithereens.
Yeah,
really.
I wouldn't mind thinking that if in sort of going back to sort of Hitler, he wouldn't have minded that dockyard for himself if invasion was successful.
Possibly.
And whether that was probably one of the reasons why it was left alone, because it's quite a iconic piece of structure. But again, obviously I would never be able to verify that.
No, or he might not have realised quite how iconic it was, because we could get into a whole sort of conspiracy side things here, but when you think of all the double agents and Garbo being one of the most famous ones, and all the different things that they were misfeeding back to him. But talking about spies and agents and stuff, which this actually quite neatly brings me on to, I was looking through the old newspapers for anything to do with Chatham while I was researching for this show, and I found an interesting story that in March of 1887, nowhere gives this person's name, but somebody was arrested as a traitor because they were giving top naval secrets. They worked at the yard, the dockyard, and they were giving top naval secrets to the Russians. Yeah. Okay, get that. But the Americans as well, and that's why they were arrested.
Wow.
And they were arrested in front of all their colleagues at Chatham Dockyard in 1887. I found that quite amusing. No, the Russians you can kind of understand, but being arrested for giving secrets to the Americans, yeah, I found that one quite amusing, really.
Yeah, I definitely think so, and I don't think it's quite surprising of agents and double agents sort of back in those times. I think everyone had their own agenda, didn't they?
But they couldn't. Apparently, the British couldn't work out why some of the American, because obviously it was still this time when the Americans had just declared independence and all of that kind of thing. So they were sort of at loggerheads with us a bit, and they couldn't understand why they had these top weapons designs that they thought only the British had, and then they realised it was somebody at the Chatham Docks had been passing the secrets to them and the Russians. That's just one of the stories. I found quite a few interesting stories. But you mentioned the Spanish side. Well, that doesn't surprise me, because that was really the whole reason that Elizabeth I got Chatham Docks up and running to the level it was, because of the wars with Spain. You think of words like Spanish Armada and all that kind of thing. So that doesn't surprise me, the Spanish links at all. Yeah. The children, yes, there would have been orphan ships, hospital ships, prison ships as well, and prison ships would have had children on, and they would have possibly been docked there, because there was an awful lot of ships were actually just docked there, where they couldn't go anywhere else, because obviously the basin there was deep enough for them to be docked there, even if they weren't being repaired. But also there would have been a lot of child labour, and in something like the ropery, where there's like menial jobs that children could do, they were probably running from one end to the other to ferry stuff around.
Because when we was walking around the actual dockyard, when you was asking, did we get to see the site? But some of the team were getting the sort of like an impression of what how they were picking things up and this, that, and the other. And when it went back later, my view was it picking up in the dockyard, or was it in the building? This, that, and the other. And the general consensus of the team was that it was the site as a whole, rather than just the building. So yeah, that was quite significant for us.
Yeah, so it could have been the orphan ships, or or it could have been, there would have been a lot of child labour there, as there was back in those days. It wasn't, it was the norm. Whatever we think of it now. So there are times when I'd like to put my 9-year-old out to work. It might tire him out a bit, but it's unfortunately you're not allowed to. But going back to, I'm going to take us back to 1667, and anyone who sort of got remembers their history at all will know that in 1666 we had the Great Fire of London. Then following on, that was just after we'd had the Great Plague. But in 1667, the country that we were at loggerheads with, or the nationality that we were at loggerheads with, were the Dutch. And there was, I think, 3 big wars with the Dutch in the late 1600s. And one of these battles, and it was during the Second Anglo-Dutch War, is one that nobody really talks about. Have you heard of this one, Darren?
No, I haven't. No.
Okay. It just proves my point, doesn't it? Nobody ever talks about it. And the belief is that nobody ever talks about it because it's the one big battle that the British have lost.
Oh, wow.
And they lost it quite majorly. And this is known as the Battle of the River Medway. Now, Medway is the estuary that Chatham is on, isn't it? It's sort of the estuary that leads past Chatham Docks. And without going into a full-blown sort of put my sort of cloth cap and glasses on and look like a history teacher, basically we were fighting with the Dutch quite a bit. And the commissioner at Chatham had been told the Dutch are amassing in the water outside the Medway. You know, you need some help. And apparently he was quite sort of like, there's no way they're going to try and get up the river. No, don't be stupid. They're not going to do it. Well, at this time, docked at Chatham was actual King Charles II's flagship, the Royal Charles, and one of his top battleships, HMS Unity. What the Dutch did is they managed to get up the Medway, and they managed to take the Royal Charles and the Unity, and they towed them back to the Netherlands.
Wow.
And in fact, there's a museum in the Netherlands that still shows the sort of I don't know what you call it, the breastplate of the Royal Charles, as it's a ship that they captured. Now, this was bit of an embarrassment to Charles II, as you can imagine, seeing as he thought his dockyard, the sort of Royal Naval Dockyard of Chatham, was impregnable, his forces were impregnable, the island of Britain was impregnable, and they stole these two ships, and literally, I suppose, for want of a better term, stuck 2 fingers up at the monarchy of the UK and said, we can do what we want. And it was at this time as well that, to stop them getting any further up the Medway, and actually pretty much stop them getting to the actual dockyards, the British basically set fire to 30 of the ships that they had docked in the Medway that were either being worked on at Chatham or were about to be launched from Chatham. So they had to destroy 30 of their own ships to stop the Dutch getting any further up the river. This happened over a period of about 5 or 6 days. Now, the reason it's seen as a failure is, first, that they did manage to capture a flagship, which back then, you know, it was I'm the king of the castle sort of rhyme that would have been probably going through people's heads. But also, it was seen to be impregnable, and nobody thought the Dutch could do it. But interestingly enough, and I was talking about Landguard Fort, it links in because they were also believed they were trying to get into Harwich, because Harwich was also a major port, naval port at that time. This is before Harwich Redoubt and the Martello Towers was built. Yeah. They weren't built till about 1810. But there's also a very famous battle that took place on Felixstowe Beach, which is where Landguard Fort is, between what became the Royal Marines and the Dutch. And Landguard Fort was used to fight off about a month after the Battle of the River Medway. They'd kind of learnt their lesson and realised the Dutch maybe could achieve this stuff. And it's believed that 200 what became Marines under Captain Nathaniel Durrell fought off 1,500 Dutch soldiers. And that was the last ever land invasion of Great Britain. So it all sort of links in together, which is quite. I find it quite interesting. But yes, the Battle of the River Medway was we unceremoniously lost it, but nobody ever talks about it, and nobody ever commemorates it.
I think that just goes back to what we were saying before. That, you know, when I said to you, I don't think a lot of us actually appreciate just how much history we do have in and around sort of our own country. A lot of us are very quick to sort of go abroad and see the foreign history and stuff like that. And when you go as far back as you're going, it actually makes you stop and think that, you know, just what there is to explore and see here in the UK.
Yeah, Yeah, and actually another bit of that story, which is going to appeal to our boss of Parasearch Radio, Kerry Greenaway, is that these Dutch Marines, they also attacked Canvey Island.
Wow, that's right next door to me.
That's near to you as well. She lives on Canvey Island. So they actually attacked Canvey Island. So for people who think that Canvey Island's only really been anything for the last sort of 50 years and is quite a modern development, no. It was actually attacked back in 1667 at the same sort of time that Medway was being attacked. And in fact, interesting story, the Dutch soldiers were told not to sort of basically rape and pillage the place, because even though that had been done to them by the British, they were like, no, we're better than you. But unfortunately, the soldiers, when they landed, decided that they were going to do whatever they wanted and take whatever they wanted. And, I think they got given a bit of a bollocking by their commander when they got back to their ships. So, but yes, they attacked Canvey Island. So, Essex has got it going on, really.
I reckon it has. One other place I got to look at while on a completely separate date when I was in and around Kent, there's a cafe at Fort Amherst, which is literally pretty much right next door to Chatham Dockyard itself. And we used to be able to go and get a drink while I was working and stuff. And I got to have a little walk around there. And at a later date, I managed to go back and investigate that place as well. But looking into the links between Chatham Dockyard and Fort Amherst, and the other reason to mention this is obviously you can see the Medway from Amherst itself. So going on what you're saying, when you're saying they managed to get into the Medway and get up the Medway, you can just imagine sort of how that would take place. Just everything pretty much the same as what it was.
The best place to go to view it would be Upnor Castle, which is just on the other side. And it was actually Upnor that was built as part of what they call the Gillingham. I can't even speak. Yeah. The Gillingham Line, which was meant to be the line of defences in the late 1600s, and it was actually they actually. I don't know if they quite burnt down Upnor Castle, the Dutch, as they were getting up there, but they certainly defeated Upnor Castle, which was meant to be. It's not a castle, it's actually a fort, even though it's known as a castle. And if you go into Upnor Castle, which is literally just across the way from Chatham Docks, you can actually, like you say, see the entrance, and you can see the path that the ships would have taken. And, they should have had... It should have been easy shots from Upnor to stop the Dutch Navy. But they didn't. They got past Upnor Castle. So... like you say, when you start putting all the pieces together, there's some really interesting things. And I can say this to anyone who's looking at stuff to do. My two kids actually enjoyed Upnor Castle because they can run up and down stairs, they can run out, they can play on cannons. It's a really good thing to do, even if it's just with kids, to get them to burn some energy off in the school holidays. Because if you can if they can learn a little bit as well, it's quite interesting. I think it is anyway.
Yeah, there's definitely some amazing places to look at in Kent. I mean, I got to walk around Rochester Castle. Yeah. Admittedly, it's just a structure now, but that was one very interesting place to go in and look around. There's I'm trying to remember the name of it. There's a Knights Templar building, and it is pretty much as was. Which is open to the public, and that's on an industrial estate just over the Strood Bridge. So as you come from Rochester going into Strood, you go through the one-way system. There's supermarkets and a McDonald's. In there, it's actually on an industrial estate, and it's protected by some Harris fencing. That is very, very interesting to see, and that's completely free as well.
Oh, wow. Okay. So coming back to the dockyards, Darren, when you investigated there, what sort of... I mean, you mentioned you had a couple of psychic mediums with you. What equipment did you tend to use?
So we use a device called a PSB-7 and a PSB-11. So they pretty much radio frequency sweep. So
I love a spirit box, me.
Yeah, so for the people obviously are listening that are not sort of up on what this equipment does, it sort of sweeps a bandwidth frequency, but you can actually set the rate in which you want it to sweep.
Yeah.
So the theory behind that piece of equipment is if you're actually picking up conversation at a fast rate of sweep, you can actually generally take that as being prospectively paranormal. You because it's sweeping too fast to hear a normal conversation like we would be having, for example, on this frequency, or you'd be listening to your local radio. One piece of equipment we used. An Ovilus is another one which we used. So that actually has got predetermined program words into it, and the idea is that spirit can influence that piece of equipment to actually bring out words that it's trying to basically get across to you. CCTV, we use that as well. And dowsing rods, we use them. They're generally quite good piece of equipment to use. And FLIR camera as well, so thermal imaging. So we have got to pick up on sort of natural temperature in the building, and so we was able to pick up temperature drops and things like that. We do have various other bits of equipment, just sort of like very basic equipment, but some of the more higher end equipment we generally bring in at a later stage. So yeah, we've got some decent bits of equipment we've been using recently.
So did you, what I mean, I love a spirit box. I do. I've had some amazing stuff with the spirit box, and I am a skeptic. I'm a believer, but I'm also a skeptic. So if I get a piece of evidence that seems too good to be true, well, any evidence really, I will be looking to debunk it as much as possible until I've run out of ways to debunk it before I can say, well, actually, yes, that could be real, if you know what I mean. One of the ones when I was doing Kelvin and Hatch nuclear bunker, I had voices coming through on my spirit box, and when people say, well, it's just a broken radio, it's just picking up radio signals, well, you can't pick up radio signals down in Kelvin bunker. You're too far underground. And I checked this with somebody who understands radios intimately, who said you would need an aerial up above the ground connected to your radio to pick anything up when you're 200, 300 feet underground. And the stuff that was coming through, it sounded like it was at the time we thought it was when there was loads of earthquakes and hurricanes in the world. And we thought that's what it... But then when we sat back and re-listened to what we'd recorded off the spirit box, if that makes sense, it was like, well, hang on, that's what would happen if there was a nuclear bomb drop. That is the kind of things that would happen. There would be hurricanes. The weather would go nuts. There would be lack of food. There would be... And we realised we were listening, possibly, to almost like a residual spirits going through a mock. This is what's now happened. This part of the world's got an earthquake. This part of the world's got, and it was quite fascinating. So,
yeah, sorry, go on.
Sorry, what were you going to say?
No, I was just going to say you were talking about Kelvedon. We had a very weird experience at Kelvedon. Kelvedon's always been a place that sort of interests me because of the history there. We had there's an engine room which you probably know about when you go deep down, and it's sort of a dead end in there, and the machines are on the left. Well, we had our FLIR equipment in there, and there was only 3 of us in the room. And as true as I'm telling you, you can see the lock-off handles on the wall, which you probably would have seen yourself, and they've got padlocks for them. So the machines themselves actually switched on. Yeah, we actually had, and I believe it was an audible of how it would have been then. We heard the machines kick in, but when you moved the FLIR camera around to the machines, it was 2 degrees colder than the ambient temperature in the room. And these are like belt-driven machines. And that is one location that's always really interests me.
Oh, we could talk about Kelvin and Hatch because it's one of my it's always had ever since I moved to Essex 20 odd years ago and first saw the signs for the secret nuclear bunker. It's always had I've always been attached to it, if that makes sense. It's it's a fascinating place, even without. But I don't find it an intimidating place at all. I'm quite comfortable in it. I've spent the night there, and it wouldn't bother me if I was on my own in it. If I'm completely honest, as long as I've got food and water, I'd be quite happy. Quite happy. It doesn't scare me, whereas a lot of people get quite nervous by it. The only thing that unnerves me about it, what it was actually built for, what would have had to have happened for it to go into lockdown. That's the only thing that unnerves me. But the actual place itself, no, I love it. Quite happily spend time there. I can't remember where I was going with this now. Oh yes, Spirit Box. So, what sort of things did you have come up on the Ovilus, the Spirit Box, all that kind of thing at Chatham?
Originally, when we put it on, it was almost picking up a load of gobbledygook, if you like. Nothing made any sense when we first started using it. But we've had this a few times before now, where we give it time, everything settles down, and then you then start sort of picking up things. A lot of things that we was picking up was the word sorrow kept coming through many a time. Iron. So whether that was in relation to sort of material of the ships and bits and pieces. The word mummy kept coming up many times. Again, when we looked back, was picking up on children, etc. So we was correlating that to that. It left the question. And the word water come up. Obviously, I know that could just come up anyway. But obviously, we was in and around water. So we was actually picking up things that made sense to the structure. That was the things that would come up. But the and the word levitate came through on the machine. We never physically saw any levitation, but that was another thing that's what come through. And when that come through, as you can imagine, the hair on everyone's neck stood up, expecting to sort of see if we was actually going to be picking bits up. But we was picking up odd snippets of what sounded like people talking, sort of every now and again. And one of the people that had their own sort of spirit box, he had the earphones in on the PSP7 because there's a phone slot. So he was actually listening. So a lot of the times people were actually hearing things. He actually confirmed that he was actually hearing them on the headset as well. So that was quite good for us to be able to confirm that we was actually hearing what we thought we was hearing.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, I mean, at Chatham, regardless of the ships, the fact that Nelson's HMS Victory was built there, the last ship he ever was on. And I grew up in Norfolk, so Norfolk is known as Nelson Country because it's where Horatio Nelson was from. But what I also found when I started looking into Nelson as a person, the first ship he was ever on, he first went out to sea at the age of 12 years old, and it was on a ship called the HMS, I think it's pronounced Reasonable, which was also built at Chatham. Both his first and his last ever ships were built at Chatham.
Yeah, it's...
which is quite... And I looked through all his others, and most of them were built elsewhere, like Woolwich and places like that. But his first and his last ship, both built at Chatham.
That's the irony of that.
Did not use the word. It's a bit spooky.
Yeah. It most certainly is.
Yeah, I found that a bit like woo, do sort of moment. But yeah, his first and his last ship, and Chatham wasn't the only dockyards. It was one of the biggest, but it wasn't the only dockyard. And for his first and his last ship, very famous, Nelson, incredibly famous, Battle of Trafalgar, which is where he fell in 1805, when he was chasing down somebody called Villeneuve. For the fact his first and his last ship, both built at the same dockyards.
Yeah, well, if you was to see inside that dockyard, it's almost as if what they've tried to do for the general public to see is they've got sort of pretty much one ship from sort of each era of time. Yeah. So as you go through, you can sort of appreciate sort of not only how technology's come on, but also how people used to have to live and cope within that time, especially with sort of like the close quarters of some of those buildings. I mean, on the Ocelot, it's very, very confined and cramped in there. I don't do closed spaces very well, as in like really tight spaces. But sort of seeing sort of the technology as it's evolved was quite interesting.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, the Ocelot, it was only designed for 69 men. But some of the submarines they built, I think they started building subs in, let me think, I think it was 1905 was the last battleship ever built there, because the battleships were getting too big and they couldn't fit them in the slips. So that's why they started building submarines instead, but most subs were for sort of 100, 120 men. But as you say, if you go into a submarine, you do still start to think, how could 120 men fit in here? It's
Absolutely.
tiny. I mean, I'm only 5'2", and I got to run around the sub that they used to film the film U571.
Oh wow! Okay.
And when I was in San Francisco years ago, and I say I'm 5'2", and I felt claustrophobic. And I used to know someone who was a submarine commander who was about 6'2", And I just think he must have been ducking the whole time to walk around, because there was even bits I had to duck to get through at 5'2". So I can't imagine. And the thought of being on a submarine that was built in 1908, no thanks.
No, I think health and safety's come on since then, to be fair.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't like the thought of going on a submarine underwater full stop, let alone one that was built over 100 years ago. But as you say, yeah, they've got a great sort of, there's things to see there, there's things to experience. But it has actually got, I mean, you said you mentioned sorrow was one of the words that had come up. There have been a few very nasty accidents at the dockyards, and all during the late 1800s, actually. And I was looking these up in the newspapers to sort of find some real stories, some real sort of not second-hand accounts or third-hand or fourth-hand. In September of 1866, in a steam hammer boiler burst, but killed 2 men straight away, and actually injured up to 50 more in an accident. There was a boating accident in June of 1893, where I think it was some actual Royal Engineers who were coming over from, I think it said Harwich, and their barge got ploughed into by a bigger ship, and 3 of them died straight away as soon as it hit them. You had in June of 1896, somebody was scalded he was constructing something called black cement, which is what they used to seal the ships with, and it exploded. And he died at the Royal Naval Hospital, which I believe was on the site. The building they use is on the site of the dockyards, isn't it?
Yeah, that is, yeah.
And it was interesting you said levitate, not quite the same, but in February of 1898, a shipwright by the name of Richard Bletchford fell from a ship called the Goliath and died. So there's an awful lot of, even if you take away the predominantly men who would have died on any of the ships that were built there or were brought back for repairs or whatever, just the workers themselves. It was a dangerous place.
It was. One of the things that just come back to the forefront of my mind was one of the crews that actually picked up on an accident that took place, and they kept saying over and over as if they feel as if their arm is trapped. And afterwards, when we got talking to the staff there, now the lady that runs that dockyard, as you can imagine, she's had to be very much up on the history and claims that have been made, and etc. And she did say that, you know, on the area there where we was, there was quite a noted history of people catching limbs and arms and bits and pieces. So yeah, that was quite interesting. Piece of information that we got more of there.
Yeah. Well, it's just amazing that you've got to investigate those things. It's not somewhere that the general groups can hire or get the opportunity. But I'll tell you what, it goes to show, Darren, if you don't ask, you don't get.
Oh, most certainly. Yeah, most certainly. I think it must have been fate that I was there that day.
Must have been.
But for me to see it just during the daytime was really interesting anyway. But the fact that I know we only got to do one small section of it, and who knows, in the future I might be able to go back. But yeah, I'll most certainly try.
Well, if you need a historian...
Oh, you're more than welcome to come along any time, and I dare say we can have a chat about that afterwards, yeah.
I'm sure we can. Well, like I said, I mean, it's what I say to people, is if you don't ask, you don't get. The worst someone could say to you is no. But if you don't ask and sort of prove that you're going to be respectful and you're not going to damage anything, and you're doing it for the love of the history as well as the love of the paranormal, most places are going to embrace that, I think.
I think because of the way the industry's gone, well, in the 15 years that I've been doing this, most certainly the last 10 of it, the industry's changed very, very much so. It's more sort of TV. There's groups that are set up as a business, and I do think now that we're going more towards a divide between paranormal investigators and ghost hunters.
Yes, definitely.
And I just think that ghost hunting is more of the hype, the thrill, and people get money off of it. Not saying they don't have a general interest in the field, because they're more than likely do. But paranormal investigators, such as myself, and obviously you're an investigator as well. We look for sort of the history, the scientifics, confirming things and stuff like that. And it is a bit of a shame in one hand that it's gone that way, But who knows? It might sort of fall back into line in the future.
I think there's a place for both. I really do, because I think the event companies, they offer, you know, if you get 20 people along on an event who've never done an investigation, and I'll call it an investigation, never done one before, one or two of them might go, actually, I want to learn more about this. I'm not doing it for the sort of like the thrill factor. Yeah. I'm doing it because I'm interested. I wouldn't know where to start. I know that's how I was when I first started. I didn't know where to start when I first started investigating. It's not like a handbook. Well, there is, really, now I found, but at the time. So going on these events gives you a bit of a taster. It starts to give you some contacts. Most of the event companies I know, the good ones, if you said to them, I am genuinely interested in looking at this seriously, they'll put you in touch with people who can help you. And to me, that's the good side of it. The other good side of the event companies is they get to go into places that you or I in smaller groups could never afford. Never afford. And right. And that's why I enjoy tagging along with them, because they let me go off on my own and I get to explore these places that I could never get into on my own. And so I think I say good event companies, you know, but I agree that there's been a massive boom in them just recently because it seemed to be a boom area, but a lot of those won't succeed. You know, you've got the ones who've been running 10, 15 years, the big ones, who are still doing okay. You might have a few new ones come along, but I think a lot of the newbies in the last 2 or 3 years, they're probably not going to last as event companies, because that's just the nature of business. You get the boom and you get a lot of them drop off. But I think as long as people realise when they go on one of these events that I'd say proper paranormal investigation, because they're not all ghost hunters, but an actual real investigation is not like you see on the television. You talk to someone like Katrina Weidman or the guys from Tennessee Wraith Chasers, all of those, the guys from Ghost Brothers, Richard Estep, who does Haunted Case Files, all those kind of people. Yeah. They will tell you what you see on television is a snippet of the 2 days or 3 days they've spent in a location filming constantly. Yeah. And that's what I try and explain to people when they first come on even an event company investigation is, it's not going to be like you see on the television. A demon is not going to jump out from you behind that door.
No, you're absolutely right, because I mean, I think a lot of people, when they come along to these investigations, they have an interpretation of what they think it's going to be like and what they expect, and they expect to get things. And obviously, and you, me, and the rest of the people in this industry know that isn't always the case. And sometimes you can go to places which are renowned for activity, and we go there and you absolutely get nothing. You're right. You know, I think once people actually realise what it is and what they're getting into and what it's all about, that they'll actually know really if it's for them. And a lot of people that get into it enjoy it, and they really do stay in it. And as you said, there's some decent companies out there. I know of a couple that I can name off the top of my head, but then they've worked really hard at a good reputation. And I think the ones that the ones that come and go, you know, it might just been that it wasn't for them to try and get involved in things on that scale.
Yes, I think that's a lot of the time what it is. They just don't realise what you need behind you, and also how long it takes for a business to be working for itself, rather than you having to plough all your money into it. You know, you're looking at 2 to 3 years minimum. But I can see a place for both. I can see a place for the event side, who, you know, the people who want to be a ghost hunter. I can also see the place for people who want to be proper investigators, and a mix of both sometimes even. As long as each know what their USP is, it's fine. And I enjoy talking to anyone who's got a passion for it, whether their passion is different to mine. Whether it's people who believe in demons and I don't, whether it's people who believe in other things that I don't, or vice versa. It's interesting to talk and learn from each other, really. Yeah,
learn experiences and share ideas of sort of how things could be and how they can go. Most definitely. I mean, I've always had a good sort of knack for listening to people. I suppose that's what job that I do, but the listening to some of people's views on the industry itself is quite interesting. Stat on its own. But I think if we can merge and everyone works together, I think the whole industry will be good as a whole.
I agree. I think we're going through a bit of a blip at the moment, but that's what happens when you get fast growth. You go through a blip and then it sorts itself out. So we should be heading for that soon. So what places have you got on the cards that you're going to be exploring soon?
So we've got there's a what's the word I'm looking for? It's like a cottage over the back end of Woodham Ferrers, Oldham Way. That's actually owned by someone in the team knows. They apparently got a lot of activity that's been going on in the home. So we've been getting more into doing homes as opposed to large structures, just for a breath of fresh air, really. So that's one, and Hutton Manor is another building which we've got coming up very soon.
Hutton is in Brentwood?
Yeah.
Wow.
So Hutton Manor's work is on the cards. We've had it agreed by them for us to go in there. So that's one place that we're looking to sort of get on board with and do some investigations. They haven't actually had the public come in.
No, they haven't.
Through links of people that people in the team know. They know someone who's related to someone there, and we're going in there in the summer. So
that'll be an interesting one.
Yeah, but we'll almost certainly stay in touch, and we'll see if we can get you along.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, thank you ever so much for being a fabulous guest, Darren. It's been really interesting talking to you and talking to someone who's actually got to investigate part of Chatham Dockyards, which I don't think anyone else will have done, and the fact you've let me wax lyrical about the history as well without snoring on the end of the phone.
Oh no, it's interesting to hear a factual point of view on places that we've been. Obviously, we speak to people that try and find out information to verify bits and pieces that we've got, and you can only take it so far, or as good as the information that's been given to someone else. So the fact that you've been able to put a bit more of a confirmed stance on it is very, very nice for us.
Thank you. Well, that's my style. I must admit, at the moment, I'm trying to prove whether or not prisoners of war really did build Harwich Redoubt, and I'm finding it very hard to find a definitive answer to that one, but I will find it somehow, even if I have to build a time machine and go back to the 1800s. Well, if anyone wants to get in touch with you, Darren, how do they get in touch with you?
So obviously on our Facebook page, so just type in New World Paranormal.
Okay, we'll share that on the Parasearch page after the show's gone out tonight. So if anyone does want to drop you a line, they can through that, if that's okay.
Yeah, or you can get in touch on the EPAS section Great Britain page if they're looking at getting involved, and we're looking in the future to invite guests to come along on some of the foreign investigations that we do, be as part of the team and come along as part of the team. So there's the opportunity for that in the future.
Wonderful. Well, thanks again for your time. I've really, really appreciated it. I hope you don't get too many nasty call-outs in your day job. I say day job, but 24/7 job as a paramedic. And I'm sure we'll talk again soon, because I'm going to be badgering you about Hutton Manor. Anyway, especially as that one's just up the road from me, and it means I don't have to get home at 5 o'clock in the morning. That's why I love doing Kelvedon Hatch, if I'm completely honest, because it's 20 minutes away.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you'll probably have the same stance as that. We don't want to know much about it. We're just going to go in and...
I won't tell you anything then. I won't tell you anything. I'll keep quiet. I'll just smile to myself when certain things happen, knowing full well what the link is. Don't worry. I can do that. I can keep quiet until after the event. Don't worry. Well, thanks, Amy. And if anyone does want to contact Darren and ask about the investigations or learn more about Chatham and some of the other places we've mentioned, drop him a line on his group's Facebook page, and I'm sure he'll be happy to talk to you. But on that note, don't forget, we've got shows on every night of the week. Tomorrow night, which is Thursday, is the PSH radio show, and Friday is the Dark Mirror show, and they're going to be talking about the devil footprint phenomenon. And there's even a link to Chatham Dockyard in that one, would you believe? It's getting everywhere, isn't it? But until next week, my friends, thank you for listening. Have a good evening, sleep tight, and don't worry too much about things that go bump in the night.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to join us for more shows throughout the week. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and the World Wide Web to keep up to date with all the shows right here on Parasearch Radio.